Hopefully it lets us record. All right. I think we're good to go. Okay, take this off. That's all right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Andrea, for being here today. So as Andrea mentioned, my name is Carrie Knudsen, and I work for Ndsu Extension in Grand Forks County. I am the horticulture agent. So I want to do a little bit of history, not history, a little bit of education on why it's Ndsu Extension and not UND Extension. And throughout my travels in the county, believe me, I get that question all the time. I find out who is a UND supporter, who is an NDSU supporter, and those that can't see in the middle. So NDSU is North Dakota's land-grant university. It was established in 1862. And along with that, there are a couple different laws and acts passed. But in 1914, I believe the Smith-Lever Act was established. And that is what established the Extension Service in conjunction with the land-grant university, which is NDSU. So that is why it's NDSU Extension and not UND Extension. And the mission of NDSU Extension is to help the citizens of North Dakota and the counties grow and thrive in their lives and communities through science-based education. There is an extension office in just about every county in North Dakota. We have 52 counties in extension, and I think 50 or 49 extension offices. Each office is a little different based on the size of the county that they are in. So in Grand Forks, we have a larger office just because we do have a larger population base. So we have myself, the horticulture agent, we have an agriculture agent, we have a couple of food and nutrition agents, a parent resource coordinator who works with parenting classes, we have a 4-H agent, and all those pieces will be found in some form, and no matter what county you're in. And if you do happen to move outside of North Dakota, you will find some form of extension in every state that you're in as well. So look to them for information. So today we're going to be talking about houseplants. I just want to go through a few basics of houseplant care, and then we'll pot up our plants and you'll be on your way. So raise your hand if you have houseplants right now in your house or in your office. Anybody? A couple? Okay, how many have one house plant? One. Okay, who has two? Okay, three, 4. Oh, 5. Oh, we're dropping off at 5. Okay, Naomi, how many do you have? Your hand was still up at 5.
I have a lot. I actually have my horticulture degree, so
Okay.
that explains it.
And then Adrienne, how many did you have?
About a dozen, I would suppose.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay. So
But
we
it's
definitely
between work and home, so I had to take all my work plants home, and suddenly we're in a jungle.
So we definitely have a lot of people with some houseplants experience and some with not so much, but that's good. We can all learn from each other. I am by no means a houseplant expert. I think I have half a dozen or more at home. And because of COVID, every time I went to the grocery store, I kind of added a few more every time just because plants make you happy. So we'll share a few tips and tricks today. The first thing that I want to talk about with houseplants is soil matters. So you all got a little bag of potting soil. And can anyone tell me what potting soil is? How it's different than garden soil or the actual soil in the ground that we grow our gardens and lawns and trees in? Anybody have an idea? Anybody want to share?
Does it have like peat moss in it or something?
Yes, Terry, you are correct. So potting soil is a mixture of peat moss, so essentially decayed organic matter, and then it usually has some vermiculite, which are the little round balls that you see in the peat moss, or excuse me, this is perlite and vermiculite. You can see that looks kind of like sand. And these are just heated minerals that are in the peat moss that help hold water and help hold nutrients. And they're in the peat moss to kind of help replace some of the soil properties. When I say soil, like garden soil and the ground soil. The reason why we want to use potting soil or peat-based soil in our plants is there's a few reasons, but the garden soil, if you were to take it and to move it, put it in your container here, your plant would probably do okay for a while, but because of the size and just moving the soil, you kind of break up the soil structure. So there isn't any pore space in the soil. So you don't have room for water or air to move. Kind of just becomes a big brick of clay, especially our North Dakota soils. So that's why we want to use peat moss, so that there's plenty of space in there for water and air to move. The roots of your plants will be very happy with that. So always make sure, even for your containers outside, that you're using potting soil, or you can do a mix of garden soil and potting soil too. Another reason would be disease. So potting soil is usually pasteurized or sterilized. I'm sorry, I'm moving over here. To prevent any disease in it. So that's another good thing for your house plants. And in an enclosed environment, you don't want to bring anything in there that could possibly transfer to your other plants, especially if you have more than one. So soil is important. The next thing that I want to talk about are containers. And I have a couple different containers. I'm going to show you the bottoms. And what's the difference between the two containers?
Drainage and no drainage.
Drainage and no drainage, exactly, Naomi. And I know I'm guilty of it as well. When I'm shopping for a container, I go by looks first, and then I pick it up and look at the bottom and go, it's not going to work. You need drainage on the bottom for a couple of reasons. The first thing, so you can water properly. It's always good to, when you water, to make sure that the water can drain freely. If there's any salts or anything that's accumulated in there, when you water, it'll flush it out. And you don't want the plant sitting in water. That will cause root rot, and your plant will not be so happy and probably eventually die on you. So make sure that whatever container you use, that there's drainage in it. If you do have a container that you are just in love with, another option would be to buy like a little nursery pot and put it in there. And then when you water it, take it out of the container, put it in the sink, and then put it back in there once the water's drained. So that's always a possibility. Any questions on containers? There's a question in there.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. I've been told that if the pot does not have a drainage hole, put rocks in there. The science is on the fence as to if that works or not. I think it is a temporary solution, but most people plan on having houseplants for a long time, and it's just not going to work over time. Eventually, that area is going to fill with soil and roots, and you're still going to have the potential for root rot. If you do find a container that you really love, look into finding a bit that you can drill through ceramic or terracotta. If it's plastic, it's usually not a problem. Or look for those inserts too. That's what I would recommend for long term. How do you pick the correct size pot based on the plant size? That is a good question. You typically, when you're repotting, so your guys' little work well pots in your ivy here, it's just a little bit bigger in width. It's a little bit deeper. I would not put this plant in like a big 10-inch container. So you typically just want to go up an inch or two in size. I have been wanting or repotted my house plants in my office, and I went up too big right away, and it really kind of stunted the plants and set them back. There's just too much space for them in there. So just go up an inch or two at a time. Speaking of repotting, if you have a container that you like, that you don't want to move it to another container, you can always just, Take out the pot and shave the sides down an inch or two and put it back in the container with some more soil. That's perfectly acceptable to do with houseplants if you don't want to go through the expense of buying more pots, or the pot is big enough and you can't move it as it is. So that's always a good thing to do for plants. Was there another question? So, yep, drill holes. You can get drip. Yes, thank you. It's for ceramic. And then a tip is to put like painter's tape or masking tape over the bottom if you're going to drill, and that will hopefully prevent any chipping of the ceramic as well. Okay, let me check my notes here to see where we're at. Oh, watering is a big thing. It's the #1 thing that can kill your plants, either too much or too little. And watering varies on the environment, so you need to be a keen observer of your environment. If you have a place that is really cold and dry, you're probably not going to need to water as much versus an area that's really warm, or if you have high humidity, that's going to play a factor as well. So the best thing is to get in there and get your hands dirty and just get your fingers down in the soil up to your first knuckle. If you still feel moisture, you know, if the soil feels moist, wait another day or two if you water it. If it's really dry, then it's definitely time to water it. And when you water, make sure that the water can drain freely, that you don't let it sit. You know, if it has a catch basin that you, like this little pot, if it has a catch basin, make sure you dump out that water once you've watered it. You can water 4 or 5 times, letting it soak through all those particles in the potting soil, absorb the water, and leaching out any salts as well. New to this, if you drill a hole, won't the water and soil come out and make a mess? The holes, so the question is, if you drill a hole in the bottom of the pot, won't the soil come out? That is true initially. Like for this pot, the first time or two that you're going to water it, you'll have some soil loss, potting soil loss through the bottom, but the soil will kind of clump together and you won't have as much coming out of the bottom as the plant gets used to being in the pot. Your holes don't need to be very large, a 1/4 inch in size, depending on the pot size is a good, couple of those is a good size as well. For fertilizing houseplants, there's lots of different houseplant fertilizers out there, so anything will work. Just make sure that you're following the label directions, not over applying, especially in such a small area that you can potentially damage your plant if you're putting too much on. In terms of timing for fertilizer, we typically do it in what coincides with our growing season. So during the spring and summer, when the sun is stronger, you can still fertilize in the winter, maybe not quite as often or not as much, because plants they know it's winter, the sun isn't as strong, it's a little bit colder in our homes. They're not as actively growing as they do during the summertime. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of repotting, you do have a plant that you're thinking about repotting. It will tell you if it needs to be repotted. So if you water and the water just gushes out the bottom, or if you water and the next day it's wilted, or it just seems kind of like it has stunted growth, that might be a really good indication that there's something going on with the soil in the pot. So this is a Fiddly Fig. It's a very hot item when it comes to houseplants. You can see them in greenhouses. They're as tall as I am. They're like $150, just because they take a long time to grow. But I bought this one, I think in February, and I've been looking at it thinking, I really need to repot it. I'm not happy with the soil that's in there. I'm not sure. It's just straight peat moss. I don't think they had anything else in there. So I've been wanting to repot it, but I wanted to pull out, if I can do it without making a mess here. It's okay to make a mess. Try not to make a mess. You can see the roots. You see the roots on the bottom there. If you had a plant that really needed to be repotted, it would be just covered with roots. So this one, in terms of being repotted, switch the other side, it's probably okay. It doesn't need it in terms of space for the roots. But for me, it's more of a soil thing. I'm not really happy with the soil mixture that was in there. And typically roots, healthy roots will be a light brown color, or they might even be white, and they'll be hard. They won't be mushy. So that's something else to look at when you're looking at your house plants. Are there any questions out there? I have some of them. My notes. Okay, just a couple of things before we get on the potting. Your houseplants, when there's something wrong with it, you kind of have to be a detective and kind of figure out what could have been done to it or what's going on in the environment so you know how to fix it. The number one thing that usually happens with houseplants is overwatering or underwatering, and they both kind of had the same symptoms, a lot of wilting, plant depth. So that comes back to checking your pot, making sure you have a pot that has drainage in it, using your hands to test and make sure the soil is moist, and also knowing your plant requirements. So my Fiddly Fig here is going to have different, it likes growing in a different environment than my succulent. My little succulents survive on neglect. Ignore them, and that's the best way to keep them alive. I had a master gardener that told me that, and I've been able to keep them alive. Kind of ignore them and they'll grow. So definitely you will water a succulent differently than you would water a fig or your ivy. Your ivy will like to be a little bit more on the moist side for the soil, whereas a succulent, it'll want to be on a dry soil. So make sure you know what your plant needs are when you're watering. In terms of light, your ivy will like bright light. So what I can see from a lot of your video feeds is you guys have bright rooms. Bright light would be like a south-facing window or a west-facing windows in the room, and not right next to the window. The sunlight that comes in, especially during the summertime, can be really harsh, and you might get some sun scald on the leaves. So just in a room with bright lights, typically our offices with the lighting have a lot of light that will work for ivy as well. For plants that need low to medium light, that might be a room with a north facing window or an east facing window. But again, not right next to the window, because when that sun comes in, it can potentially burn the leaves. And that is also true in the winter time. A lot of times we like to set our plants right next to the window to get close to the sunlight. But in the wintertime, there can be temperature changes between the house and the windows. So there might be some issues too. So pull them back a little bit from the windows if you have them there in the wintertime. Any questions on lighting, watering, or fertilizing? No. Okay. Does everybody have their plant ready to go? Let's get your hands dirty. Got some paper. Some do, some don't. Okay. So the first thing I think we're going to do is you notice that they're not the same depth. So I would kind of eyeball and put a little bit of soil in the bottom of your pot. One thing we want to do is leave about a ½ inch or so at the top of the pot, so the soil is not all the way to the top, and this will act as a reservoir. So when you water, you don't get water all over your desk or your counter. It will give a spot for the water to hold and slowly sink into the soil so the water has its best effect. So we'll put a little bit of, do you want me to pot this one? Yeah, okay. So put a little bit of soil on the bottom. Kind of get an eyeball, use the stickers. And this is where you are going to make a little bit of mess. So putting it back on the tray will help. I can get the bag open. Just put a little bit on the bottom. Kind of press it down a little bit. You want the ivy to be, so the level where it's at right now is, I keep moving on you, I'm sorry. The level where you want, it's at the soil right now is where you want it in the pot. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this. We're learning. So just gonna pack it down a little bit. kind of measure. This one is about right. It's about 1/2 inch down from the top of the pot. And these are fairly new plants in the pot. So you can see, if you remember from my ficus, that it was, the roots were kind of circling around a little bit. I don't see a lot of that in here. And I don't know, everybody worries about being container bound for plants and different things, but I don't see that as an issue, at least with this one. So just putting it in your pot will work. And then getting some more soil and just filling in around the sides. Being careful not to put too much on top of the soil of the plant that's already there. Kind of push down a little bit at a time. Make a mess so you can clean it up later. Potting soil is easiest to clean up when it's dry, so you don't smear it everywhere. How's everybody doing? Getting it in there? Got some extra soil for those of you that have other houseplants. You can do some propagating. Just kind of packing it down a little bit. You can see got about a little bit of space in there for water to sit. And you do want to water it when you're done repotting. And it might take a little bit of time. Potting soil, especially if it's on the drier side, can be a little bit hydrophobic. It can repel water. So just take your time and put a little bit in at a time, let it drain freely, and your plant should be good to go. How are we doing? Thumbs up? Okay. And in terms of care for your ivy plant, like I mentioned, bright light, it does like to have soil on the moist side, and then a little bit cooler if possible. My daughter did a really good job killing her plant. She had a little fairy garden in her room. She was not real great at watering it, so it would dry out all the time, and it died. It let us know it was not happy. So we learned that an ivy is not probably the best plant for her. So she has succulents in her room. She has a south-facing window, and they thrive on neglect. So,
what about those deals that people put like and stick in, that you like fill with water and then you kind of stick it in the soil and just kind of self-waters?
okay, self-waterers. I have not had a lot of experience with them. I think they can be good for plants that like to be a little bit on the moist side. But once again, you want to make sure that you're not overwatering the plants. You want to check the basin to see if there's water standing there, and then you probably know your plants are getting too much water. So it's a little bit of an experiment to make sure you have the right environment and the right plants for it. And I also wanted to share, so everybody probably has these in their offices as well. Potholes plant, I think this is the #1 office plant, cannot be killed. It will grow up walls, over furniture. It thrives in office conditions, likes the bright light, but not direct light. It likes moist soil, but can have a little bit on the dry side. It will let you know if it needs water. It wilts, but it doesn't die. So it'll come back. And this one I do, this is where it is. Do as I say, not as I do. As you can see, I don't have any drainage in this one. This is a little experiment I have. So we did a kokedama lesson a few years ago. So it was, you wrap soil in a moss ball with twine. It's kind of like an air plant a little bit. And it did not work out well for me. So I just put it in here and I'm seeing how long I can keep it alive. It's proof to the fact that pothos are pretty indestructible. It survived COVID in my office without me in there all the time. Has wilted sometimes, been overwatered sometimes, but it's a pretty tough plant. Yep, pothos. It's a little bit different. It gets confused with philodendrons, but they have different leaves. But philodendrons are pretty tough too.
I could handle that.
They're both pothos and ivy are pretty easy to propagate. For ivy, if you find out that it gets too long or you maybe want to share something with someone, just take a leaf cutting. So you want to have, it's kind of hard to see here. You want to have a couple nodes, couple leaf nodes where the leaf is coming out. And you want to stick a couple of those nodes in the soil, have a couple above soil, and it'll root in soil pretty easy for you. Yes, pothos are very easy to propagate. Gardeners are people who collect houseplants, often give them as gifts around Christmas. Are there any other questions? I do have a brief survey. I think Andrea was going to put in the link for me. If you could take some time and fill it out, I would appreciate it. Let's see, Melissa's question, when you propagate, do you place? So when I propagate most things, I put them directly in soil. Some gardeners or home houseplant enthusiasts will put them in water. Some will put them in perlite or vermiculite. I choose just to put them right in soil. Sometimes it seems like it takes a little bit longer, but it saves you that in-between step too. It will work really well for pothos. Some other things you might have to experiment as to what method of propagation works best for them. But yes, Andrew, put in the link. If you could fill that out for me, it would be greatly appreciated. Just know that where it says gardening, just put in houseplant. It's kind of a universal survey for gardening and horticulture. Snake plant. Oh, that's a good question, Emily. Snake plant bought in October, replanted it. I have a snake plant too, and it seems like it just does not grow, but I think they're very slow growing. So where I would look, if you're not seeing any on the top, very carefully pull it out of the pot and see what the roots look like. If there's a good root base and the roots look healthy, you know, it just needs some extra time to get those above ground leaves. Yep, thank you, Naomi. They're really slow, but really hard to kill too. There's a saying, and I think it goes for if you garden or if you have houseplants, if you haven't killed the plant at least 3 times, you're not gardening, you're growing houseplants. So don't be scared to kill something. Judging by the number of plants in this group, somebody will be able to give you a cutting if you have a plant that perishes.
Oh,
Yes, that is testament. I think there's a reason why they call snake plants mother-in-law's tongue nickname, because it can live. Yes, Pam's happy to share cuttings. So thank you all for joining us today. It was fun. If you have any questions, yeah. Do you want to let Andrea know? You can put in my email. My email, yeah, it's carrie.knutson, K-N-U-T, @ndsu.edu. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day. Like I said, I'll send out this recording. That way you can have it for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.